Hello, and welcome back to Educator.com's Introduction to PHP course. In today's lesson, we're going to continue working on our web application, incorporating some of the information that we learned in our last few lectures on functions and constants. We're going to quickly just talk about some of the things from the last web application version, which is 5.1, and then we're going to go through three new revisions of the web application. In version 6.0, we're going to basically be adding a web application configuration file, which is going to include a lot of different constants, which is going to make managing the application easier. In version 6.1, we're going to make use of the constants in order to move our image directory up one level from the directory tree, which is going to make it easier in developing future versions of the application, as you'll see. And then in the third version, 6.2, we're going to be making use of constants to output and functions to output basically the date and time that an order was created, as well as doing some sales tax calculations. So if we go and look at version 5.1, this is the store as we know it. It's got a view cart function where you can select different quantities. Go ahead and check out, and so forth. And when you complete your order, I didn't enter any shipping information, it'll say your order was completed. Well, what we're going to do is create a configuration file that's going to make managing all of these different pages within here easier. So in version 6.0, we're going to create a configuration file called config.php, and we're actually going to store it in the version 6.0 in the includes directory. We're going to create a new file called config.php, and that's where it's stored. And basically in this file we're going to do a couple things. We're mainly going to be defining a bunch of useful constants that we can use in all of the web pages, and because what we're going to happen is we're going to include this configuration file in all of our web pages, and then we're also going to move the catalog.php include that was in all of the pages and move it here into this one config file, because this is already being included in all the files, so we can locate all of the includes in one spot. So the couple of different constants that we're going to define, the first one we're going to define is a version number, and basically it's just a string that, and basically what that's used for is we're going to be creating a constant called image_dir, which is going to be the location of the image directory for our web application. And we're going to build this image_dir constant up from what's called the root URI, which is the basically the base URI or URL of our web application. And as we know from working with it previously, if we go back to home, we can see that, for example, for version 5.1, the URI after the host name is intro to PHP web_app and then the version number, and that's the sort of root URI for that version of the web application. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a root URI constant, and we're going to define it as we do here, except that for each configuration file or each version as we update, we're going to update the version number, and that's going to update the root URI because every root URI has a different URL because they're stored in a different version folder. Then we're going to create this image_dir constant, which is basically the root URI, and as we know from what we've done in our previous web application, is the images are all stored in a folder called images in the root directory of the web application. So that's what the image_dir constant is going to do. Additionally, we're also going to be creating a constant that has a path to the include directory, where we store all of our includes files. And in our web application, we store all the include files in a folder called includes in the base folder of the application directory. So what we do is we creating a constant called docroot, which makes use of the server document root variable, which gives you the document root of the entire web server that the script is running on. We're going to append to that the root URI that we created up here. So it's basically going to it's going to add to document root the path to the folders of the path to the folder of the current version of the web application. and then we're going to create an include directory or include dir constant that's going to append to this document root, which is going to be a version. The document root is going to be version sensitive because as up here we defined the root URI depends on the version number. And then what we're going to do is, so we've created the document root, and the include dir is just going to be that document root for this particular version of the web app, which is going to be an absolute file link, and we're going to add to it just the file path includes / and that's basically going to say that the include directory is at our web applications document root in the includes directory. Then we're going to define two constants called HTML header and HTML footer. And basically what they're going to do is instead of having to explicitly in each of our files have an include statement that says include / header.phtml, for example, we're going to create that all in one constant, and then we're going to use that constant in all of our different pages. And now what that's going to allow us to do is, let's say we decide to change the name of header.phtml that we want to use for a header file. Well, the way we currently have it, we'd have to go through every page and update that header.phtml include statement. By creating a constant called HTML header, which is basically the path to the include directory, and then the name that we want to use for our HTML header, and by setting that to this constant HTML header, we can use the HTML header constant in the include statements in all of our files. So if we ever need to change what we want to use as our header include file, all we do is update it once in this configuration script by updating this constant, and all of the different pages will receive the updates. Additionally, at the bottom here we just have include the catalog, which all of the pages have included normally, but we put it all in this one config file, and catalog.php is located in our include directory. So if we look at previously, for example, at store.php, as mentioned, you can see that we have an include file that has hard-coded into it include / header.phtml. And actually in every one of the web pages in our previous version of the web application has this hard-coded in there. So if header.phtml changed, you have to update all of the changes. Now what we've done in store.php is at the beginning of our each page we include the new include file config.php that we just created that defines all these constants, and now our include statement changes to just include followed by the HTML header constant. So now anytime we update this HTML header constant, if the header file changes, basically we've updated what we're going to do is we update this all the include statements in all of our files to use this constant, so that change will get propagated to all of the different files. And also if you look at the bottom, you can see that we've replaced the include / footer.html with the HTML footer constant. The other thing that we've done is because we created the image dir constant, anywhere we have an image, we can an image tag in the source. For example, in header.phtml is where the logo, the image tag for the logo is placed. What we can do is in the image tag source attribute, we can just specify to output the image directory or the image dir of which is the image directory for this particular web app version, and then just specify the image name. And what that does is that, like with using the HTML header file, it allows us, the HTML header constant, it allows us to change the location of our image directory, and we only need to update it in one spot. We update it in our config.php file. And then because all of the different files that are going to access images are going to use this image dir constant, by making the change in our config file, all of the pages will get updated accordingly. And so you can see we've done that here in header.phtml. In item.php, we output the image's ID, the item's image, and so you can see we've used the image dir constant here as well. And then in viewcart.php, where we output the list of all the items in the store, it outputs a small version of the image, and you can see we use the image dir constant here. Now what that does is, if we look at, let's pull up the older version of item.php, for example, from version 5.1, our last version. we can see that in our image tag, the images folder was hard-coded into there. Now that's been replaced with this image.dir constant so that we can update and change the image directory folder if we choose. Now that's also going to change how the links work or how the links appear in our source code for HTML. So if we go and look at index, for example, this is version 5.1. If we view the source of this page, we can see that, pull this up, the source for our image is this hard-coded string images / educator.png. Well, in our new version, in app 6.0, if we go to store.php and we view the source, we can see that the image source has now been updated to this absolute URL, which is specified by image.dir. And so this is output everywhere the image.dir constant is used. So now the URL becomes the full path to the image directory for the version 6.0 web app. And we're basically saying load educator.png from this image directory. So this page right here, this slide actually just shows all of the changes that we had talked about. We created a config file, config.php, that contains a bunch of application-wide constants that we can use in all of our different files. So we've done this. We've updated all of our files to use the HTML header and HTML footer constant. So if we need to change the header, header or footer file, we can do it in one location. And then we've updated all of our places where we've used image tags to use the image.dir constant to find where the images are located. In our next version, version 6.0, we're going to take advantage of this image.dir constant, and we're actually going to show how it's beneficial in that we're going to change the location of the image directory. Now that we've included the image.dir constant as the path for all of our image tags, by updating that once in our configuration file, it'll update it for all of the different pages that include images. So if we move the image directory, which is what we're going to do in this particular version of the web application, just by updating the config file, all of the pages will be able to find those images. And what that's going to do is it's going to, right now, every time we create a new web application, we're copying the images directory over from one version to the next. So for example, in version 5.1, we have all of our files in the folder, and then we have an images directory that contains all the images. Well, in version 6.0, we have that same image directory with all those images, and so we're copying them over and over. What we can do is, if we copy this directory and move it up one level outside of the version directory, and just create an images file here, now we can reference this directory in all future versions of our web application, and we don't have to copy it into each version folder. Now, one that kind of saves disk space, but the other thing that it does is it's also showing us the power of being able to use constants to make these changes. So if we go to our, let's go to our web app. Let's close down some of these pages. And we go to version 6.1, first of all, you'll notice that the image directory is no longer here. We had moved it up one level. If we look at our includes directory and we look at catalog.php, oh, sorry, not catalog.php. If we look at config.php, which is our updated config file, you can see that we've updated the image.dir constant. So now instead of being intro to PHP web app version xxx/images, it's just intro to PHP web app/images, and that'll be the same for all future versions of our web application. So if we actually go and look at the version 6.0 version of the pages, and we view the source, for example, we can see that the source has been updated so that it uses this new image directory. And if we look at, for example, the source code for the store.php page, or excuse me, the header.phtml page, we can see that, as before, we have included this image.dir constant to specify the image directory, and because we updated it in our config file and the config file is included in all of our pages, this header file will always know where to be able to find the different images. So those are basically the changes for our version 6.1. The final version we're going to talk about today is moving on to version 6.2. And what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of what we've learned about constants and also what we've learned about functions, particularly date functions, to add a little bit of improvement to our web application. First of all, we're going to include a sales tax calculation for the user's shopping cart when they go to checkout. And as part of doing that, we're going to introduce a round, the function called round, which you can look up in the PHP function reference, which you now know how to use. And we're going to use that to round out our total to 2 decimal places, because sometimes when you do math, like we're going to be calculating based on sales tax, you could get some really long decimal numbers, and this is going to round it down to 2 values, which is what dollars are typically shown in. In order to do this, we're going to be adding a constant sales tax rate. And basically that's going to allow us to set the sales tax rate we want to use for all of our calculations in the whole store and put it in one place. We're also going to be creating a constant called order date format. And what that's going to do is we're going to be adding to our thank you page a timestamp that says thank you for your order, it was completed at this date and time. And we're going to be using the date function for that. And as we learned from using the date function, we know that the first argument that it takes is a string that specifies the format of how you want the date output. We're going to basically make that format a constant. So we're going to set order date format to a string that's equal to the format that we want to use. So for example, let's say we have the format that just shows the month, the day, and the time that the order was purchased. Well, maybe in the future we want to update it so that it includes the year as well. Well, we can go to our config.php file, update order date format so that the string is this new format that includes the year, and then that change is made. And on this particular version of the web app, we only are using that order date in one spot, so we could, technically just hard code it in that one spot in thankyou.php. But if, let's say, we need to use this format in other parts of our web page, maybe we want to output the order creation date and time in other web pages, by creating this constant in the config file, we can then use that formatting in many different spots and only have to update it in one spot if we decide to change it. So as mentioned, we're going to output on the thank you page the order creation date and time. We're also going to output what the sales tax rate was used to calculate the total. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to make use of the string to upper function that we learned about, so that the state abbreviation that a user enters in the checkout form is always going to be capitalized, because sometimes they might, for example, for California, type CA in lowercase, and to properly format it, we're going to capitalize it to capital CA. So let's go and take a look at some of the code for version 6.2. First off, let's look at the config file. And you can see in the config file, one thing we did is we've updated the version number so that all of our include URLs and all of our, well, not the image anymore, all of our include URLs will refer to the right version directory. We've also added a section here of miscellaneous application-wide constants. And here's where we've defined order date format, and this is a string with date formatting sort of constants in it that you can learn about on the date functions web page at the function reference at php.net. Also, we've defined a sales tax rate constant. In this case, we're defining it to 0.1, which is 10% sales tax. So now if we go and look at, let's go and look at checkout.php. And actually, before we do that, let's go to version 6.2. We'll go to the store. We're going to view the cart. And let's place an order for one of each item. And we go to checkout. Now, as you can see, the total has sort of changed from the way it was last time. Last time we just outputted basically the the subtotal of all the items. Here it says your total was 709.48, rounded to 2 decimal places, and it says with sales tax. So we've actually added to checkout.php sales tax to our calculation for the total. So if we go and look back at the new checkout.php, we can see what we had from the other version, well, I guess it would have been 6.1. And basically what we've done is we've updated the variable that used to be called current total to current subtotal, because that's often what's a total is called before you add sales tax to it. And then so we've updated all of the 3 operations that add the price and quantity of each item to the subtotal. Basically, we had multiplied the price of each item by the quantity selected and added to that. So these are the same operations as before, except they're adding it to the value current subtotal. Then what we're doing here that's new is we're creating a new variable called current total, which was in the last one, but now it's going to have a different purpose here because it's going to include the current subtotal plus any sales tax. And the way that we calculate that is we add to the current subtotal the current subtotal times sales tax rate, which is our constant we defined. So if we want to ever change the sales tax rate to, let's say, 9.75%, we can update that in our configuration file, and then it will get updated here, and this calculation will change. Then you can see that we've gone ahead and used this new function that we talked about called round. Basically, it takes a float number as its first parameter, and then the number of decimal places you want it rounded to as a second parameter. So we're going to round this total to 2 decimal places, because that's what dollar amounts are represented in. And then, simply as before, we're going to output the current total, and then just have a mention that it says with sales tax. Now, if we go back and proceed with the checkout, and notice I'm going to use lowercase letters here for the state. Scroll down a little bit, and then go to complete order. You'll see a couple of things. You can see your order was completed on, and we've added the order completion time that shows the date, the time, and the time zone. And we also output as before the final total, but we mentioned that it included sales tax at a rate of 10%. And then also down here you can see that we've the user had entered, in this case I had entered a lowercase state abbreviation, but to properly output that we capitalize it and we use the string to upper method. So if we go or function. So if we go and look at the thankyou.php page, you can see a couple of changes that were made. First off, in the section at the top that outputs information about the order total, you can see that we've used the date function, which by default, if you only specify one parameter, outputs the current date and time. So that would be the date and time this order was created. And we're going to format that date according to the order date format constant, which we have defined and declared in our config.php file. And so if we ever wanted to change it, we could go change it in that one spot, and it would propagate here as well. The other thing that we've done is we've output a little message that says with a final total of, and then we output the order total including, and then we do a calculation that outputs the sales tax rate, which is basically to do it in a percent, we multiply the sales tax rate times 100, and this in this case is going to output to 10%. The other change we had made was down here in the table that outputs all of the address information. We can see that we've used the string to upper function to capitalize the any state abbreviation that was provided by the user. One thing you'll notice is that we've used the concatenation operator here, and that's because, as we had talked about before with functions, functions can't be included within double quoted strings as you can variables, and so we have to use that to basically concatenate this value to the city and zip code value. And so this is basically what our final page looks like. And to give you an example of the flexibility this provides, let's say we go back to our config file. And let's say we don't want to output the time zone anymore. So for example, T is the time zone in the date function format. So if we delete that and we save it, and we go back to here, right now we have PDT, which is an abbreviation for Pacific Standard Time, and we update our web application, or excuse me, update the page. We can see that it's eliminated the time zone identifier. And so basically that shows you how, let's say we had used this date formatting in a couple of different spots in our website, we just went ahead and updated it in one spot. So for today's homework challenge, I just want you to, as usual, go through, make sure you can identify and understand the changes that we made in progressing from version 5.1 to version 6.2. In particular, I want you to consider how the changes we made have increased the flexibility and maintainability of the web application by using constants in a common config file. We've seen how now, for example, with the include statements for our headers, if we ever want to change the header file that we're going to include, we only need to change it in one spot as opposed to every page. So that basically increases the ease that we can maintain our web application because we don't have to update each page individually. Additionally, these constants provide some flexibility because now we showed how we could move the image directory to whatever directory we wanted to, and by using a constant to define that, we update the new image directory in one spot, and all of the different pages are now able to find the images. So that ends today's lesson. Thank you for watching Educator.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.